Captain, there's something heading our way extremely fast. It's coming straight at us. I've never seen anything like it before.
Action. Racing. Fun. Adventure. Nintendo 64, the fastest, most powerful games console on Earth, now at $99.99.
Well, I have to say that was one of the less weird adverts that we've seen. We've seen some strange ads for consoles from the 90s and early 2000s, such as the GameCube and the Xbox, PlayStation 1, those kind of things. So that was quite an understated advert, I thought. I think there are some other weirder ones out there, but I thought that was pretty understated. Anyway, I'm Andy C. Welcome to Pieces of 8-Bit and welcome to this week's video. It is the end of the month. Well, it's actually already, we're well into November now, but this is the first opportunity I've had to do it. Just coming back to review what it's been like to live with the Nintendo 64 for the month of October. For those of you who watch my channel, you'll know that every month I take a piece of hardware, or in some cases a little bit of software, such as an operating system, and I live with it for a month, and then I come back and talk a little bit about the history of it, some of the specifications, talk about some of the games that I'll have been playing, and of course I'll tell you what it's been like to live with that console for a month. So this month, like I say, is the Nintendo 64, and this has been living in my living room for the last 4 weeks, and I have been playing a lot of games on this. So I'll be telling you what that's been like, and I'll also tell you a little bit about how to get back into playing Nintendo 64 if that is something that you are interested in doing. So without any further ado, let's get stuck straight into some of the history of the N64 and how it came to be. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about the history of the Nintendo 64 and how it came to be, and also a little bit about how it fared when it launched. So it launched back in 1996 in June in Japan, and in September North America of that same year, and we had to wait, as we usually did in the 1990s, until March of 1997, which is where that advert is from, in fact. So we had to wait a little while before we got our hands on the Nintendo 64. Started life as Project Reality in 1993. Nintendo joined up with Silicon Graphics, and really what they wanted to do was to kind of get that reality immersion technology that Silicon Graphics had, that we saw in games like Jurassic Park in the arcades, and bring that into the home. And what they did was they built a true 3D system with 3D graphics that were rendered in real time, as opposed to the sort of pseudo 2D 3D graphics that we were seeing on their competitors, the Saturn and the PlayStation 1 at the same time. The big mistake I think that a lot of people would suggest is that the Nintendo 64 still launched with cartridges, and these were largely considered to be a pretty old technology, especially for a main under the TV console at the time. The PlayStation 1 and the Saturn, of course, came with CDs, which were much cheaper to manufacture and had significantly more storage. So these only had storage of 4 megabytes, which was very, very limiting, which was a real shame. And I think the cost of these was also a big problem. So they were about £50, which in today's money would be £100 for a game. You're forking out somewhere in the region of £100, which is a lot of money for a game. We're not even seeing games at that price now, apart from maybe special editions. The PlayStation and the Saturn, they were priced more reasonably at about £35, which is still expensive, actually. When you think about adjusting that for inflation, games were a lot more expensive in the 90s than they are now. But £35 as opposed to £50 really was quite a big deal back then as well, not least because these were also quite limited. The nice thing about cartridges for a retro gamer, of course, is that these are a lot more robust, so you can plug a cartridge in, they just seem to just work. You need to give them a bit of a clean and off you go. But that was a big problem as well. But there were some distinct advantages of having a Nintendo 64. First, of course, one of the big things was the fact that we got the 4 ports on the front. So this was the first console to out of the box support 4 players, which was fantastic. And of course, for those of you who remember the Nintendo 64, playing on Mario Kart on 4-way split screen was an absolute treat. And of course, that is something you can still do even nowadays. And there's not so many games that do the split screen now, but Mario Kart is one of them, and it is one of the best. It bought the world's first 64-bit CPU, so the processor, to the console market as well. And on paper, the Nintendo 64 was significantly more powerful than its competitors, but we'll talk about that in the next section as well. And it was known for its really smooth graphics, its innovative controller, which, I will talk about this when I talk about the verdict a little bit about the controller. It is innovative, but it was also controversial. It was very kind of loved or hated. Some people just couldn't get on with it. The size of it is enormous. It was a bit unwieldy to hold, but if you got the hang of it and the games made good use of it, then it could be really, really good. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the verdict. And of course, let's not forget some of the influential titles that we saw on the Nintendo 64 as well, which also made it fantastic. So we obviously had Super Mario 64, which was an incredibly important game. It basically showed what was possible with a 2D platformer, that you could take it to that 3D world and just make it great. And I think it's still one of the best examples of a 3D Mario game that's out there. But we also saw games like GoldenEye, an incredibly important game, bringing first-person shooter style to the console and doing it really well and proving that you can do it really, really well. And whilst it probably, like if you go and watch my video about it, whilst it probably isn't the best game in the world ever anymore, it was probably one of the most influential games ever launched. And then, of course, we had Perfect Dark after that, which was absolutely fantastic. F-Zero, F-Zero X, Donkey Kong 64, all fantastic titles that were just really impactful and important games, and just fantastic games. Let's not forget, it's all well and good talking about impact, but were they actually any good? And the answer is yes, there were some absolutely fantastic titles on the Nintendo 64. So it was that real turning point. So it was quite unusual in some ways that it lost the console war by quite a margin. I mean, the PlayStation 1 just romped home. It was huge. That initial PlayStation was just fantastic. It was well received, and I think a lot of it was to do with its price point, and more importantly, the price point of the games. And it was CD, and you could put your audio CDs into it. Something which, in later generations, the PS2 introduced us to DVD. The PS3 introduced us to Blu-ray. So there was always that kind of +1 feature that the PlayStation had a really good habit of bringing. Sony had a really good habit of bringing, which, the N64 was a games console, and that was it. I think really, though, it was the cartridges and the cost of the cartridges that was the biggest problem for the Nintendo 64, and the reason why it didn't do better than it really should have done. Titles wise, like I say, absolutely fantastic. So there you go. There's a little bit of a potted history of the PlayStation 1. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about the hardware. But I'm going to do in this section, in this next section, is talk a bit about the hardware versus its competitors, because it is quite striking. So let's not hang around anymore. Let's dive straight into that section, and I'll see you in there. Alright, so let's talk very quickly then about some of the hardware specifications of the Nintendo 64. Now, what I want to do here, as I mentioned just a moment ago, is that I'd like to talk about it in respect of its competitors, because we had the Sony PlayStation 1, of course, at the same time, which came out the year before, in 1995, or 2 years before in the case of Europe. We had the Sega Saturn, the unfortunately somewhat doomed Sega platform that was rushed to market. But what's really interesting about this is that the Sega and the PlayStation actually on paper, from a hardware perspective, are broadly comparable. But when you look at the Nintendo 64 specifications, you'll see that the Nintendo 64 was significantly more powerful, which adds to that sort of mystery of why the Nintendo 64 didn't do as well as it should have done. And we've already spoken about the cartridges, and I think that is a large part. But certainly on paper, if you were buying a console based on specifications, you would pick the N64 every time. So I've got my, I'm not going to remember all the specs here, so I've got them all written down on the iPad here. So as we know, the PlayStation 1 launched in 1994, so I did my 30th anniversary of it last year, around this time actually. So it launched in 1994 in Japan, 1995 in the US and the EU. The Nintendo 64 came out in 1996, obviously 1997 here, and the Sega Saturn also came out in 1994, famously about a week before the PlayStation 1. I think it was that way around. It was certainly within a week of the PlayStation 1, a week or two. And in terms of specification, then this is the most striking part of it. In the PlayStation 1, we had a 32-bit MPS R3000A running at 33.9 megahertz, and that's the number that you need to that is important there. In the Sega Saturn, we had a dual 32-bit Hitachi SH2 running at 28.6 megahertz. So 33.9 versus 28.6, not a massive difference in terms of processor, and both 32-bit architectures as well. Pretty much standard for the time. The Nintendo 64, however, was running a 64-bit NEC VR4300. This is why I've written them down, because I can't remember the numbers of all of these. At 93.75 megahertz. So it's running nearly 3 times the clock speed that the PlayStation and certainly more than 3 times the speed that the Sega Saturn was running at. In terms of co-processors, we had the Geometry Transformation Engine on the PlayStation 1. I haven't done any research on that. I'm just looking at my notes here that I've scrolled down and popped on my iPad. And a custom VDP1 and VDP2 for the Sega Saturn. And then we had the Reality Coprocessor, Reality Signal Processor, and Reality Display Processor on the Nintendo 64. And those are the silicon graphics. That's where the silicon graphics technology appears there to really help deliver that 3D, that smooth 3D effect that you've got on the Nintendo 64. Again, when it comes to memory, main RAM on the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, we were running at 2 megabytes. And on the Nintendo 64, again, double at 4 megabytes, which was expandable to 8 megabytes with the expansion pack, which was quite expensive. I do have it in here. I had to seek it out. I will tell you a little bit about that when I talk about getting back into playing Nintendo 64. It's quite an important thing to have, actually, for a few games out there. What else is important here? Audio is about the same, give or take. Graphics power, this is where it's quite interesting, actually. And a little surprising to me when I looked into this, I was a little bit surprised about this. So the PlayStation is capable of up to 360,000 textured polygons per second. The Sega Saturn significantly less than that at 200,000 textured polygons per second. That's a theoretical amount. And then the graphics power of the Nintendo 64 is between 150 and 300,000 textured filtered polygons per second. So slightly less, actually, than the PlayStation 1. Resolution-wise, again, broadly about the same. 256 by 224 up to 640 by 480 on the PlayStation 1. Nintendo 64, 320 by 240 up to 640 by 480. Pretty standard, decent resolution back in the mid-90s, I would say. And the the Sega Saturn would go all the way up to 704 by 480. I say all the way up to, not really much of a difference there. Color depth, 16.7 million across all. Very, very similar in that respect. And then, of course, the two big differences between the two platforms, CD-ROM storage on the PlayStation and on the Sega Saturn, which have got up to 650 megabytes of storage. And then the proprietary cartridge, which was actually capable, I thought it was 4 megabytes actually, but it's actually supports between 8 and 64 megabytes typically, which is, even at the max range of that, 640 megabytes is less than 1/10 of the storage capacity on the PlayStation and on the Sega Saturn. The advantage of cartridges, of course, is that they are much, much quicker to load, and so you get a much quicker loading time. CDs, especially back then, were pretty slow, so you had to be quite patient on getting those loaded, but I'm a child of the 80s. I had to wait 15 minutes for a game to load, so waiting 20-30 seconds for a game to load as opposed to 10 seconds, not really a big deal. And of course, they had those controller ports. So on the PlayStation 1, for instance, and on the Sega Saturn, you had those 2 ports. There was a multi-tap that you could buy for the PS1 to take it up to 4. But obviously the Nintendo 64 came with it built into the platform, and it's nicely designed into there as well. So it's native out of the box. So notable strengths on the PlayStation 1, obviously the CD storage, the strong 3D performance, the massive third-party support. That cannot be understated. The support for the PlayStation 1 was enormous. Loads and loads and loads and loads of games. The Sega Saturn was excellent at 2D, excellent 2D capabilities, and it had really good, strong arcade ports. So Sega Rally is a great example of a game that you absolutely must have if you own a Sega Saturn. Absolutely fantastic, great at that. And that's really what Sega were going for. They wanted a platform that was capable of taking their great arcade titles and bringing it into your living room. And of course, the notable strength of the N64 is its advanced 3D hardware, its anti-aliasing, and of course that 4-player that I mentioned before as well. So weaknesses then, the PlayStation 1 suffered from texture warping, limited Z buffering or Z buffering, and the big problem with the Saturn, and I'll come on to this one day when I do a month with, was its complex hardware. It was very difficult to develop for, and it wasn't that good at 3D. It was pretty weak in terms of its 3D tooling. And of course, as I've mentioned before, the issue with the N64 is that cartridge limitation. It is a huge problem. It is a huge problem for the Nintendo 64. Such a powerful machine, totally limited by its storage capability. And they tried to resolve this with the 64DD, which came a little bit later, which was a mess of an add-on, and it was expensive, and it still didn't bring... It bought more storage, but it still didn't bring CD-based storage to the platform. And I think that's where the 64 megabytes comes from. I think if you had the 64DD, you could have the additional storage on there, but it was still sort of like a cartridge disc thing that you plugged in to it. Only a handful of game servers supported it, and it only sold about 15,000 units, so it wasn't a great add-on. So I think it was a real big mistake, and I remember at the time actually that Nintendo, the big Nintendo fans out there who were looking to go and get the Nintendo 64 were talking about it. At the time I wasn't really into consoles. I was still kind of playing on the PC most of the time, or on Amiga, so I wasn't really into it, so I didn't really care much for the argument. But I did think it was weird that you had cartridges and that they were so expensive on the N64, and at the time I was working, so if I'd thought about buying a console, I almost certainly would have gone out and bought a PlayStation 1, especially as it would have been my first foray into console gaming back there in the mid-90s. So, well, certainly from an ownership point of view anyway, that's where I would have invested my money. So, not that I had any money back then, because I might have been working, but I was also a student. Right, well, here it comes. Here's the catchphrase. The games make the console. There we go. I actually said it. I say it every time. But one thing I would say is that for the Nintendo 64, the games making the console statement is probably more true than on most other platforms. The games on the N64 are so important, and there are some absolute behemoths in here, which we're going to just talk about now. So, what I want to do is split this section into two bits, because there is one particularly important house that now belongs to Microsoft, but was really the driving force behind a lot of the N64's absolutely epic games and their sales and their reviews, and probably helped to shift a lot of the N64 consoles themselves as well. And that studio is Rare. And Rare, of course, are responsible for GoldenEye 007, which is a fantastic game. You can have a look at that on my bit between. I talk about it in a little bit more detail, but an incredibly important game, bringing FPS to the console and showing how it could be done properly. And it was a fantastic game, amazing soundtrack, great characters, very cinematic, all of those things. When you look back at it now, it looks very dated, but at the time it was an incredibly important game, largely considered to be one of the greatest games ever made. By today's standards, obviously it is, it's been surpassed, but it also is, you'll find its DNA in a lot of other games that you see now. Games like Half-Life, you'll see the DNA of GoldenEye in that game, and many other FPS style games that we play or have played more recently. So that was GoldenEye, and of course straight after that Rare released Perfect Dark, which is another fantastic game, a game which I really love, and I actually like it a little bit more than GoldenEye. I love the sort of sci-fi, sort of futuristic kind of element to it. I like the kind of Blade Runner vibe about it, and it is a fantastic game, and I feel comfortable enough to say that because really what Rare were trying to do with Perfect Dark is just improve on what they did with GoldenEye, and they really did it. Interestingly, actually, this comes with an 18 certificate. I never even noticed that before, but that's the first time I've seen actually an 18 certificate on a game of this age. But brilliant game by Rare. So really just following in the footsteps of GoldenEye and just setting that scene and then just improving it. And Rare also bought out, we had Donkey Kong 64, so another absolutely fantastic game. It was quite Marmite, people loved it or hated it. We had Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie as well, all of which I've been playing this month. I have really enjoyed playing all of those. I've not had enough time to play them in any great depth, but had a good play on those. And I've also played a little bit of Diddy Kong Racing. Now, interestingly, there's this ongoing debate about Diddy Kong Racing and whether it's better than Mario Kart. I think, for me, as someone that was just picking it up and as someone that is very familiar with Mario Kart, I preferred Mario Kart, but I know a lot of people get some hate for that because Diddy Kong Racing is largely considered to be a little bit more varied, a bit more challenging, and it is certainly challenging. It is quite a hard game to play. So I quite liked it, and there's a little bit more variation, and you've got boats and other things in it as well, which I quite liked. Yes, so Rare, and I almost certainly haven't talked about all the Rare games there, but those are the Rare games that I've been playing this month. So there's 5 Rare games, all of which are absolutely brilliant and have fantastic reviews. On top of that, of course, I mentioned Mario Kart, so I have been playing a bit of Mario Kart 64, which is like, you just got to play a bit of Mario Kart. That's just the law if you're playing on a Nintendo console. Played that with the kids. Obviously, my kids are used to playing Mario Kart 8 and Mario Kart World on the new Switch too. So playing Mario Kart 64, and when I played Double Dash when I did the Cube review a little while ago, is a bit of an eye-opener for them. But, you know, I think, interestingly, my youngest son said that he actually enjoyed Mario Kart 64 more than Double Dash, which I thought was quite interesting. But another great game. And of course we have Super Mario 64. Fantastic. I think I still maintain this is one of Nintendo's best entries, certainly back in that era, in the 64-bit platformer, in the 3D platformer. I think Super Mario 64 is better than Sunshine on the Cube personally. It is. I enjoyed playing this a lot. I played it quite a while, and obviously you can go and check out my video of that on the Bit Between as well. And then in terms of other games that I've been playing, quite a lot of others. So the next Bond game I played is, unfortunately, was an EA game. And I say unfortunately, and I can say this without sounding like I'm bashing EA, because I did not get on with The World Is Not Enough. I didn't play it for very long at all. I got annoyed with it, and I kind of quit that. Obviously been playing on a couple of races, so we did a review of the sort of futuristic sci-fi races earlier on in the month, last month, and that included obviously Wipeout 64, which, you know, for those of you who know me, know my love of Wipeout. I do absolutely love the Wipeout games, but I know that they're not for everybody. Really enjoyed Wipeout 64. It is really good, and it kind of shows off kind of that 3D ability of the N64. It just looks really good on there. Some people would argue better than the PlayStation version. I don't know. I enjoy both. I'm not going to be drawn on it. F-Zero X, of course, which is fantastic, high speed, similar sort of idea to Wipeout, but very different gameplay. Very, very speedy. It's all about moving very fast. Lots of NPCs involved in that as well, which is fantastic. And then, of course, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which is the pod racing game. And this is a game I did actually play back in the day. I don't know how I managed to get around to it. Maybe it was in a demo case or something like that. I do remember playing this back a long while ago, and I actually really enjoy this game. It's really good fun. Yeah, good example of a racer there. And then finally, just a few other little mentions. I played Star Wars Rogue Squadron, a game, the sequel to which on the GameCube I absolutely loved. And this version I think is really, really good. And it looks amazing, actually, for a game of its age. I think it looks absolutely incredible. Definitely go check out that one if you can get hold of it. Star Wars Rogue Squadron. 1080 snowboarding. Now, a lot of people love this game. I am not such a big fan, I'll be honest with you. I prefer SSX, and I know that's going to be controversial, and maybe that's just because that's what I played. And obviously, it's a newer game. It's on the PlayStation 2. Never got on with 1080 snowboarding. I found it quite tricky and a bit fiddly, and the snowboarder falls over a bit too much, and I kind of got a bit cross with it. Maybe I need to give it a bit more time. I've tried to play it a few times, but I just never quite got on with it. That being said, I get why people like it. It is a cool game. It is kind of cool and a little bit of fun. So yeah, that was another one. And then finally, decided to have a bit of a go at Command and Conquer. So I picked this up at the show up in Blackpool a little while ago, and decided to give Command and Conquer a go. I played it on Windows 95 when I did my Windows 95 review last month, and decided I want to have a bit of a go at it on the N64 just to see what it was like on the console. It's not as good. If you're going to go play Command and Conquer, go and play it on a PC. It is just a bit easier. I didn't really think it was all that great on the N64. It was okay. So, and I'm sure there's been more as well. I think I played Turok a little bit. I didn't really get on with that, I'll be honest. But yeah, so a lot of games. I mean, that's what, 3, 4, 8... 11, it's about 14 games I've been playing this. I just had to just kind of have a bit of a dig in and play them for sort of an hour or two here and there. Some I played for longer. GoldenEye I played a lot. Perfect Dark I played quite a lot. In fact, that's probably the game I played the most. Super Mario 64 I played a lot, and the others just have a bit of a dive in for sort of half hour, an hour, just to kind of see what they were like. So some really, really, really good games on the N64. So if that sparked your interest and you're thinking that, you know what, I quite fancy having a bit of a go at that myself, the next section I'm going to tell you how to get back into Nintendo 64 gaming in 2025. Okay, so if some of those games piqued your interest and you're thinking, you know what, I quite fancy getting back into Nintendo 64 in 2025, well, this is the section where I'm going to be talking about that. So there are a few options, and normally this section can be a little bit samey. So sometimes I will talk about, more often than not, I will talk about an emulator, and that's the emulator is called X, and you want to play it here, and it's good for these reasons. And I'll talk a little bit about buying a console, and obviously that depends on the console as to how easy it is to find and how much it's going to cost. But I think the emulator option is perhaps not the best option now, and I'll tell you why. And I think that there is a third option for the Nintendo 64, which I think is the best way of getting into it, which I'll talk about in a short while. So first and foremost, if you're thinking, you know what, I want the real experience, I want the real deal, I want to buy myself a Nintendo 64. So you can go and find them, and at the moment I think I paid about £70 or £80 for this. I bought it about 2 years ago. And the Nintendo 64 is an incredibly robust bit of kit, and as I mentioned, its downfall in the mid-90s of having cartridges is probably a real benefit nowadays, because cartridges are incredibly robust. They just last. The only thing you need to do is to give them a bit of a clean when you get them. Don't do the trick of blowing into the cartridge that you used to do back then. That doesn't actually... You might think it helps. It's actually the action of taking the cartridge out and putting it back in that's probably getting it to work, not blowing in it. Actually, if you blow in it, you can cause some corrosion and introduce moisture into the cartridge, which isn't a good idea. What you can do is get yourself some little cotton buds, or Q-tips for Americans watching, and some isopropyl alcohol, more than 90%, and you just dip them in there and you just give the little contacts a clean with that. And I'll tell you now, it's magic. I haven't had a cartridge. I think one Atari 2600 cartridge that I couldn't get to work, and bearing in mind they're getting on for 50 years old. But every other one that I've got, I've had done the same thing. Bit of isopropyl alcohol. Every cartridge that I've bought here, unfortunately with Nintendo, for some reason they put all their games in cardboard boxes, so a lot of them just come as loose cartridges when you go to shows now. And a lot of them, you know, sometimes have been left in a garage or something, and the contacts have gone a bit rusty or a bit dirty. Give it a clean with some isopropyl alcohol, and I guarantee you 99 times out of 100 that will work. And if it doesn't work the first time, give it another go over, be a bit rougher with it, give it a couple of seconds to dry out, try it again, and you should be good to go. I think with the NES, I had to actually do that. I had to take the NES apart and actually clean the contacts inside the cartridge, you know, where the cartridge slots in. But yeah, for the most part, that will work. So you can definitely go find yourself an N64. They are very robust, as I mentioned before, and nowadays you'll find one for about £80 or £90 if you just buy like the bog standard black one like I've got. If you want to cut, there's lots of colourful ones out there as well. The more rare they are, the more expensive they are, unsurprisingly, but you can pick yourself some really good examples. Make sure that they're working. Best place to find them, I tend to find, is the show. If you're in the UK, you can go to somewhere like Kex, and you've obviously got that warranty that comes with it as well. But I find buying them at shows is quite a good thing, and obviously that supports independent traders as well. So you can definitely get one of those. What you'll also need is either something like analog to digital converter. So OSSC, for instance, to be able to translate the signal from the Nintendo 64 to HDMI for using it on a modern TV. Or you can get something like this, which is a RAD2X, which I talk about these quite a lot. These will cost you about £50. And the beautiful thing about the Nintendo one is this will work on the SNES, on the N64 and the GameCube. I don't think it works on the Wii, but and you just plug this in, and then on the other end here you've got a micro HDMI, mini HDMI, which you plug in, and then that just hooks up to your TV like normal. It's really good. It's got a smoothing option on it as well to sort of stop the graphics being so jagged. But here's the thing, I actually haven't ended up playing most of the games on the N64 directly. I am playing them on my other option, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, because scaled up onto a big TV, actually the N64 isn't great. It's weird, that generation, so the generation that came before, this sort of SNES generation, that kind of scales up to the TV quite nicely. It did the Mega Drive on the television, it seems to work quite well. I guess because of the sort of nature of the graphics, I don't really know why, but it seems to work quite well. And if you go for the PlayStation 2 generation, the original Xbox, the GameCube, again, they'll scale quite nicely onto the TV and you'll get quite a good effect. N64, PlayStation 1 particularly, though, I had better results with the Saturn for some weird reason, but the N64 and the PlayStation 1 not so good, and the N61 is particularly bad scaled up onto a big television. It actually gave me a bit of a headache when I was trying to play on the N64 under the television. So it's not something I would necessarily recommend. If you've got a smaller TV or an older television, they'll just take the signal natively. That would be what I would recommend that you do if you're going to go back to N64. The other option, of course, is to use an emulator. Now, this is where, in a lot of cases, emulators can be a really, really good option. If you've got all the cartridges, and maybe you've got the console, doesn't really matter, but you want to go and play them, and you don't really want to hook a Nintendo 64 up or whatever, you want to play them again. I think that an emulator is a perfectly reasonable, legitimate way of playing games, and there are some great emulators out there for a lot of different platforms. We've got Dolphin on some of the later Nintendos, we've got the PCS X2 for the PlayStation 2, DuckStation for the PlayStation. There are loads of really good emulators out there, and they do a great job, and they're well supported, and they support the games as well. The main console for the N64 is called Mupen 64, and it is a good emulator, but it is not without its problems. If you've got a Raspberry Pi, so I've got the Raspberry Pi running in the background here. It is actually running at the moment. It isn't very good on the Raspberry Pi. It struggles. I struggle to play some of the games on it. It's just a bit slow and struggles quite a lot. So I didn't find Mupen 64 a great thing for the Raspberry Pi. And on the even on a more powerful modern PC or Mac, it does run well. And all of the bit between videos that I've done have been on Mupen 64, so it does work for the most part. But it is a little bit glitchy. So you'll see, and I didn't point it out while I was playing it, but if you watch, like for instance, GoldenEye, when I'm playing through it, you'll see every now and again there's like a sort of object that's completely black that hasn't rendered properly. It doesn't necessarily spoil the game. Some games will work better than others. Some might just have a couple of weird artifacts. But Mupen 64 is not great. And the only time I think that you'll want to use it is if you haven't got access to a Nintendo 64 and you haven't got any other way to play the game other than through that emulator. That's going to be the way to go. But my third option, and this is the option that I like the best, is the humble old Nintendo Switch. So this is where I would generally recommend that you play N64 games. There's a lot of Nintendo 64 games on here, including GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, and obviously all of the Nintendo games, your Mario Karts and Mario 64. So if you want to play those big titles, this is the place to do it. You can play them on your ordinary television. They scale up beautifully. They look fantastic, and you can also buy. I've been showing this a little bit. This is actually the Switch N64 controllers. You can buy these if you're a Nintendo Online subscriber. You can buy these You can probably find them on eBay as well, and it works great. And you can play it with any game if you want to. I don't know why you would necessarily want to for anything other than a Nintendo 64 game, but this is the way to go if you want to play Nintendo 64 games, and they're on the store on here. Definitely go play them on the Switch. Much better experience. And so that's what I've been doing. Most of the time I've been playing Nintendo 64. I've actually been playing the games on the N64 emulator on the Switch, and that has been giving me the best results out of all of it. And where I haven't had the other games, I have played Mupen 64, and you'll see from the games that I played, it does render them really nicely. The graphics look really good. Super Mario 64 looks fantastic. But it's not without its problems. So that is an option should you choose to do it. So there you go. Hopefully that gives you a few ideas about how to get back into playing on the Nintendo 64 in 2025. So that just leaves me to summarise now what it's been like to live with for the last month, and yeah, for someone who's a relative noob to N64 as well. So let's dig straight into that. Right then, well, what's it been like for the last 4 weeks to live with the Nintendo 64? For those of you who've been paying attention, you'll know then that this is fairly new to me. I didn't know anyone that owned an N64, and my Nintendo journey didn't really start until really 2002 when I bought a GameCube. So I'd played a lot on a lot of other consoles. Probably mostly the Game Boy was the Nintendo console I played on the most. But I'd played on the NES, I'd played on the Super Nintendo a little bit back in the day. But the N64 almost completely passed me by, as I mentioned. So this was new for me. And whilst I've played a little bit of GoldenEye, and I played a little bit of Mario 64 and a bit of Mario Kart, never really played them in any depth. So getting in and playing Perfect Dark for the first time, playing GoldenEye and actually really getting into the game and playing it a little bit more has been absolutely fantastic. And I can see why people love the Nintendo 64 and the games that were on it so much. They are fantastic games. So it has been really enjoyable. I've really loved playing on the N64 and getting stuck into it, and I kind of wished I had a bit longer, because I've played probably more games on the N64 than I've played on any other of the consoles that I've done in the month with reviews, going on for probably the last year and a bit now. So I would definitely recommend going and having a look. If you had an N64, it's great to go and revisit. I'm absolutely sure of that. You know how great the games are. If you've never played on the N64 before and you're just interested, you're intrigued by the technology and the history, definitely get in there and definitely play GoldenEye, Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, F-Zero X, I would suggest you play, and Perfect Dark. Those games, I think, I mean, there's so many great games on there that you can go play. Those ones in particular are the ones that you should definitely go revisit. And the lesson that I've learned here is that if you do buy yourself a Nintendo 64, find yourself a smaller or preferably older television to plug it into. Playing it on anything above probably 32 inches, frankly, a 32-inch TV with Ultra HD in it. We've got a big OLED television in the living room. It did not scale well, and it actually gave me a bit of a headache. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend hooking up to your television. What I would recommend, however, is if you've got a Nintendo Switch or a Nintendo Switch 2, getting the online subscription, which isn't that expensive from Nintendo, and then going and investigating those N64 games in there as well. One game I didn't actually get any time to play was Zelda, and of course we've got Ocarina of Time on there. You can actually play that on the GameCube. If you get the special edition of Wind Waker, it came with Ocarina of Time. It's probably bad that I've played on a Nintendo for a whole month and never even got around to playing Zelda. That's just how busy I've been, and I love Zelda. Just never quite got around to it. So lots and lots of games, but you'll find a lot of those big titles will be available on the Switch as well. So go check that out if that's what you're interested in. And like I say, you can obviously go and pick yourself up one of these Switch controllers, N64 Switch controllers as well. And the nice thing about it is that the stick in the middle here, I never talked about that actually in the hardware earlier when I talked about the controller, and I will just talk about that now actually. Yeah, the sticks on these controllers are obviously nice and stiff, I suppose. They did have a habit of getting a bit loose over the years with those. In terms of this then, in terms of the controller, how have I found that to be? Well, I think it depends what game you're playing. For GoldenEye's perfectly designed for it because you've got the trigger underneath, so you can hold it like a gun, and then you've got your other hand free largely to sort of do whatever you need to do. I'm still not a massive fan of this. I think there are better controllers out there. They were very experimental. There was a lot of controllers that were very experimental in that period. We saw in the early 90s, we saw the monstrosity that is the Atari Jaguar controller. Something I just think is just awful, but I know some people do like it, but nuts. And then obviously we had the Dreamcast controller as well, sort of at the other end of the decade, which is a controller. Actually, I don't personally mind the Dreamcast controller. It is all very personal choice, but I think what Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft have done in more recent years, it refined that controller design. I think, you know, the latest PlayStation controllers, the Xbox controllers, the Switch 2 Pro controller, those controllers are all really, really good. And then they don't need to be gimmicky or fancy. They just need to be comfortable in your hand, have a good weight, have good haptic feedback. That's what makes a good controller. I think the companies have realised that they don't need to be quite so experimental. So I think from, you know, that was the thing that I didn't enjoy so much from the Nintendo 64. But games, the games, the programmers, the games producers did make games make good use of that controller. So it does help. And of course, the N64 controller, you know, you didn't have things like the you had to sort of add rumble, and there was also an additional add-on that you could add for your Game Boy save transfers and things like that as well. And talking of add-ons, the other thing, and I should have mentioned this in the previous section, the other thing you will also need is something called an expansion pack. I'm not going to try and take it out of here, I don't think I can. These are worth getting hold of. You'll pay quite a bit of money for them nowadays, but if you're going to get a Nintendo 64, you'll need one of those as well. And the reason why that is important is a lot of games, like Perfect Dark, will make use of that. And some games you can only play, I think Donkey Kong 64, you can only play if you've got that expansion pack installed. So it needs that extra bit of memory to be able to actually just play the game. So that's an essential component. And that was kind of annoying because that stunted me at the beginning of the month. So when I started out, there were games that I bought that I couldn't play, that I had to then go and find the expansion pack for. So I ended up playing them on the Switch, or I ended up playing them on the emulator instead, until I was able to get a pack. Well, now I have that. That's worth it, but yeah, they're quite hard to find. Probably picked one up from CEX. I think I paid, how much did I pay for it? Maybe 40 or 50 pounds, might have been. I think they were quite expensive. So you'll need that as well. So there you go, that's my verdict. Really enjoyed it. Definitely worth getting back into. It's been a real voyage of discovery for me. N64 is a fantastic console. It's difficult to say whether I think it's the best in that generation, because the PlayStation brought something quite different. The Sega Saturn just didn't have enough games, so I think it wins there. But you know, in terms of the sort of games that you play on the two platforms, very, very different. I think that's the same nowadays, really. Nintendo versus Sony and Microsoft is quite a hard comparison, because the sorts of games are very different. Nintendo have definitely found that niche, and I think a lot of that kind of really perhaps harks back to the N64 a little bit. When you look at the SNES and the Sega, they were very much competitors. When you look at the N64 and the PlayStation, they did appeal to different markets. So I think that's probably something to bear in mind. But if you were interested, go back and check it out. So there you go. That was my month with. So next up then is, well, it's going to be what's coming up for next month. Now, I gave some clues away. If you watched my bit between this week, you may have already worked it out. Well, you would have worked it out. What it would be is a console that is probably my favourite console of all time, and is also the best-selling console of all time. And if that doesn't give it away, nothing else will. And that console is celebrating 25 years this year, and that is, of course, the humble PlayStation 2. This is a fabulous console. This is my original launch console, and this really, for me, was when I properly got into console gaming. I was a PC gamer up to that point. I bought this when it came out. Some friends had it who I lived with, and I was just like, that is amazing. And so I picked up the PS2. Now, it's a little bit of an unfair one this month, because I actually have a PlayStation 2 Mini hooked up to my TV permanently in the living room, and I play on it quite a lot. So it's going to be an interesting month with, because it'll be more than a month with. It'll be a little bit longer, but I wanted to make sure that the PlayStation 2 got some recognition at some point. And what better time to celebrate it than when it reaches its 25th birthday at the end of this month. And yeah, it is a fantastic bit of kit, and there are lots of things I want to talk about, and I don't think I've got enough time to do it. So it's going to be interesting. But so yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to get more stuck in with it this month. So we will be focused much more heavily on the PlayStation 2. So that is the main thing that's coming up. Obviously, we've got some bit-betweens, and they'll be focused on PlayStation 2 games as we move throughout the month, largely. And we'll be talking about a few things. I want to talk about some of the peripherals that you got for the PS2. So there were lots and lots of things that you could buy for the PS2. It was really the first console, I think, or that generation was very much the first generation to have loads of possible accessories and really kind of bring that multimedia gaming experience to the living room, which we hadn't really seen in quite as much earnest as we did when the PS2 generation came out. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. I think we'll talk about that in one video. But yeah, that's about it for this week. Hope you enjoyed my month with review of the Nintendo 64, and I hope you're thinking about going and having a look yourself. Definitely worth it. I would definitely recommend it. But yeah, thanks ever so much for watching. If you enjoy these videos, obviously please do hit that like and subscribe button. I really do appreciate your support. It's been really great to see lots of new supporters over the last few weeks, which has been really cool. So yeah, thanks very much for that. But yeah, other than that, just leaves me to say, yeah, please do all take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next one very shortly. So yeah, bye for now.